Hello, everyone. Well, I've been doing these interviews now with people who I truly deeply respect for a few months now. And for me, today is probably the most exciting of them all because I get to introduce you to one of my personal heroes of many years, Mary Schmick. She is a Pulitzer Prize winning editorialist, writer. She also does the comic strip Brenda Starr for many years. She's also a yoga teacher. And I first encountered her by taking a wonderful yoga class of hers in Chicago many years ago. Found her book, Even the Terrible Things Seem Beautiful to Me Now, when I was leaving the yoga class, and was like, oh, that looks interesting, let me buy a copy of it. And it has been one of my most returned to books over and over again. It's one of the few that routinely live on my nightstand table, and I have easily gifted 10 to 12 copies of this to people I love over the past several years. What I love so much about Mary is her quiet observations on the human condition, on life, on what does it mean to be human. And then especially with her background as a yogi, I thought that she would be a wonderful person to get to connect with on this channel. And so I am so thrilled to have her here today. So Mary, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me. And I didn't realize that you picked that book up in the yoga studio. That's very nice.
Yeah, admittedly, in college, when they encouraged us to start reading newspapers for current events, I started reading the New York Times and not the Chicago Tribune. So that's how I first found you, was through your book. So.
Well, as someone who did not read newspapers in college at all, I'm impressed that you read any newspaper at that age.
Well, thank you very much. So I would love to start with a question for you of how would you describe your work as an editorialist, as a writer, as an observer of the human condition? How would you describe what it is that you do in a existential sense of the question?
Well, the first word that pops to mind is not something that usually comes with the word existential, but I'm a reporter, right? Even when I'm writing about my own life and my family's life, I came up into the writing life as a newspaper reporter. Partly because I didn't know any other way to do it. You know, since I was a kid, I always liked to write, but liking to write is not the same as making a writing life for yourself. And I just, I didn't know how to do that. And so I wound up becoming a journalist. I still prefer the word reporter, which gave me a way to go out into the world and to meet other people. I didn't want to live just in my head. To take the experiences, the thoughts I have about life, and integrate other people's lives and experiences into my understanding of the world. So the newspaper life has allowed me to do that. So I started out as a reporter, just going out and doing stories, often writing on deadline. And then I eventually became a columnist at the Chicago Tribune. So, that allowed me to broaden the range of what I write about and the tones and styles that I use. It's kind of a rambling answer to your question, but if you want to refine that question.
Sure. I love, it's always interesting to me how people describe themselves and how they see what they do. For me, having read, certainly not everything you've written because you've written a lot over the years, the pieces that seem to have been the most memorable in the public zeitgeist. For example, many of us have seen your piece that went viral, Wear Sunscreen, where you imagine what you would say to a group of recent graduates at their commencement. So many of the most vivid pieces that stick out in my mind weren't necessarily a reflection on current events happening in the world so much as a quiet observation on the use of ellipses, or your relationship with your mother, or what does siblinghood mean, or what does it mean to be a Chicagoan? Like, you have so many beautiful articles about how the city in and of itself is an entity, and I so relate to that. I think if people who have never lived in Chicago don't understand the special connection people have to that city and how magical it
Right.
is. So it's interesting for me that you choose that word, because for me, the ones that stick out in my mind aren't necessarily a reporting on events so much as it is this soulful exploration of the moment you find yourself in.
Yeah, so you use the word exploration. I would still call
Okay.
that reporting. You know, when I say reporting, I don't just mean going out and covering breaking news. And I realized early on in my column writing life that I simply wasn't psychologically equipped to write the kind of column that a lot of people associate with the word column. That I just didn't have fulminating opinion on every little turn in the political scene. I just didn't care enough about all of that. So I had to fill my space with some stuff that I actually did care about. So, through the years, I wrote a column for 30 years. That's a lot of columns. And through the years, I would always interrogate myself. I wrote 3 times a week. I would get up on the day I had a deadline, and I would ask myself, okay, is there anything going on in the news? I write for a newspaper. Should I, is there anything going on in the news that I care about? And if there was, I would find something to say. But if there wasn't, and there often wasn't, I would ask myself, what am I really thinking about? What's really stirring me? What am I actually talking to my friends about? What are they worried about? And even that, just even asking the questions, that's a form of reporting, right? To report on your own mental process is, to use your word, to explore it. I grew accustomed to just thinking about what I was really thinking about, and taking the liberty that I had at the Tribune. I was lucky that I had editors who understood this, and to begin writing more personally. Not all the time. That gets old, honestly. I don't think I don't think there's people who want to listen to anybody write personally 3 times a week. It's too much of anybody. But to do it just enough that people could connect. And that was always something that I was aware of. That when you write personally, you need to think about how to write it in a way that will make it not just about you. To find the topics and the manner of expression that allows people to think, oh, that's not about her, that's about me.
I find your response fascinating. Before we began this interview, one of the things I said to you is I consider your books one of my go-to spiritual books. And part of the reason I feel that is even if you are reporting on some current events, what I so love is you sense soulfulness. You sense a wise, reflective presence, even if you're not even talking about your own experience. So, for example, you mentioned current events. One of the series you did in the past 2 years that I so appreciated is during the tenure of Donald Trump as president, you would write poems from his point of view, reflecting on current events, which were so brilliant and so witty. And even though you were writing from the voice of somebody else, you could still sense you. And one of my friends who I interviewed recently, Lauren Sapala, said, I'm always interested in artists where you don't see or feel their mask. You see or feel what lives behind it, their truth. And I am somebody who very much puts you in that category of you could be writing about a caterpillar for all I care. I could still sense your soulfulness and your character in every word, in every phrase.
that is just the nicest thing that anyone who reads anyone's words could say. So thank you. I mean, you never know when you're writing. I imagine this is true of acting. You never know for sure if you are expressing the thing you hope to express. Sometimes you have a sense, oh yeah, this is working. This is working. I think I'm doing this, but you never know for sure. One of my first editors said something to me: "You're only as good as your readers." And I thought that's really interesting. Now, people would dispute that, but on some level, I think what he was trying to say is that writing works only if it communicates. I mean, there's a couple reasons to write. One is to express yourself. The other is to communicate. In the best writing, you do both. Sometimes you're expressing yourself, but you're not communicating. And that's fine. That's what journals are for, right? It's like you can write all sorts of stuff in your journal that is not really going to break through to a wide variety of people.
Would you consider yourself a soulful writer? Is that language that resonates with you or you identify with, or no, it's flattering to hear, but that's not part of how I see my
Well,
approach.
I'm uncomfortable characterizing myself, my own writing. I, I accept that lovely characterization of it from you. Um, I do my best to write from some thoughtful feeling place. Is that soulful? Again, I don't like to characterize myself.
As I'm curious also to ask about your journey with connecting with yoga, since you are a lovely yoga teacher, independent of being a wonderful writer. Do you feel like that has at all informed how you go about communicating or how you interact with the world?
Yeah, I do. I absolutely do. Um, a couple years after I started doing yoga, a fellow journalist asked me, "Has doing yoga affected your approach to journalism?" And no one had asked me that question. And I thought, yeah, it has. I think has made me more careful about the little cruelties that you can inflict when you write. Um, Journalists, like all people, can be unintentionally cruel. Again, that's not just journalists. But journalists have a certain kind of power because they go out and they characterize other people and they take other people's lives and they put other people's lives out there for public consumption. And I just, I think to approach everyone that I write about with respect. Now, obviously, there are people who are doing evil things in the world, but to start out with respect. To start out with trying to understand, why is this person doing this? Even someone like Donald Trump, horrible as he was as a president, as much as I use those poems as a way of writing about him without being mean in the way that a lot of opinion columnists can be mean. And maybe I was too soft, but I still think they made the point. And that was something yogic, if we want to call it that. Just, the intention to understand that every human is human, that everyone is operating out of their own need to survive, to connect, to be loved or respected, or, to just have some security in the world. And I think yoga, not yoga alone, but yoga has reinforced that approach to me. Not to sound too corny, but to start from a place of kindness. Does that make sense?
It's something for myself. My yoga meditation practice has brought into my life is a deep compassion for other people. And as one of my mentors used to say to me, but for the grace of God, there go I. Had I lived their life, I probably wouldn't have been too terribly different had I had their genes and their parents and their life experiences. And so developing this compassion for all sentient beings, saying, you might make choices, you might do things I tremendously disagree with, that I think are unkind or unconscious or potentially even cruel. But I've let go of anger. There's the Buddhist quote of anger is like a hot coal that you pick up with the intent of hurling at somebody else. You do more damage to yourself than you do to the other person. And I so sense that in all of your writing, that even somebody like Donald Trump, somebody who, I'm sure on many levels we find repulsive, that doesn't come through in the writing. You find this much more bodhisattvic sort of point of view of, I'm coming from loving compassion. I might have something to say about your behavior, but it's not coming from judgment. It's not coming from rage. It's coming from a level of santosha, contentment, internal peace. And how you described about trying to not do violence to other people, right? The practice of ahimsa, very evident in your writing, and something that for me is something I aspire to. Reading how you approach these difficult situations, say, I want to be that. I want to grow into that. This is being done with a great level of finesse and deftness. And
But you just use the word aspire. I mean, I think, at best, that's what we're doing all the time, right? We're aspiring, and sometimes we get there, and often we don't. And again, not to get too yogic on you, but just the idea of noticing, right? Which is a fundamental idea in yoga. First, we notice. Before we try to change, first we notice. And we notice when not just what other people are doing, but what we're doing. We notice when we are inclined to respond cruelly. And when we do, not just inclined. It's like, look, and I just want to make it clear, I've done yoga for more than 25 years, but, the thing it does for me, it reminds me to be better, to, when I do the things I wish I didn't do, to just notice, okay, you did that, get back on course. Maybe you'll do it a little more or a little less. Again, I'm rambling. Stop me anytime.
I agree. It's something that I very much say all the time is there is no perfect enlightenment. You don't reach this point in your development and say, oh, cool, I'm done, box checked, but that we're constantly aspiring. We're constantly working to grow more, to become more healed, to become more loving, to become more compassionate. And that the yogic practice or any personal development practice is that. It's repetition, it's work, it's practice, it's rehearsal. You keep going back, you keep trying to do better, you keep trying to live more in that state, and the work is never done.
Well, the passage, again, I trust whoever's listening to this is kind of interested in yoga, but, a passage somewhere in the Yoga Sutras, that talks about that a useful yoga practice requires faith and perseverance. Faith and perseverance. Practice over a long period of time. And that long period of time is basically your life, right? It's like, and I feel that way about writing. Writing, especially writing a column, is very much like a yoga practice. And that you get up day after day, after day, after day, and you just do it. And some days you do it better than others. Some days it rewards you more than others. Both of them require that faith and perseverance. Perseverance implies work, implies difficulty, implies that it's not all just rainbows.
Well said. One of the things I often think about and work on with my clients is this idea of self-knowing, and that the journey to understand the world, to understand the cosmos, the divine, if you want to call it that, is also the journey to know oneself. That the journey outwards and the journey inwards are often the same. And one of the things I've observed in life is those individuals who have cultivated a great sense of who am I? People who have cultivated their grit, their tenacity, endured hardship, who have, cracked open their self, have a tremendous amount of humility and resiliency and something really beautiful to offer the world, and come from a more, again, going to use the word soulful place. When I encounter your work, I very much get the sense always of somebody who has come to know and be with themselves, to sit with themselves in a meaningful way, to have been someone who has examined the dark corners of the unconscious, of the soul, of the shadow, and has found a level of peace with themselves, has found a level of understanding and acceptance of where they are. Do you feel that way about yourself? And if you do you feel like that has contributed to your success as a writer and being a successful person in the world?
Oh, periodically I feel some of that. Um, the whole idea of knowing yourself is a very interesting one. I recently, after a long trip to California and Oregon, I came back and I'd seen old friends, some siblings, and for some reason this prompted me to start clearing out the closet where I keep my lifetime of journals and letters and photos, and I had this deep need to organize it. And I'm not someone who generally goes back and reads my old journals or reads old letters, but in my organizing process, I found myself opening these journals from different phases of my life and reading letters, and some of it I remembered, and a lot of it I didn't. And I looked at this stuff, and I thought, was that me? Is that me? That's so interesting, because I don't remember that me. Does that mean that I've evolved? Oh, I don't know. I have not come up with an answer to this, but it was very interesting to encounter written down a version of myself that seems similar to me and that I assume has been assimilated into me. But to not fully know how I got from there to here, and to recognize that, in 20 years, if I'm still lucky enough to be around at the age of 88, that I will look back at this phase of my life and go, what was she up to then? What was she thinking? It says right here what she was thinking, but really? I do think that, partly with the help of yoga, partly through the wonderful relationships I've had in my life, I have been very fortunate in the quality of family and friend relationships I've had. I think I am a clearer person than I was when I was younger. but maybe we all are. It's like you live, you process your life, and if you are lucky enough to have, whether it's a practice like yoga or friends with whom you can connect, um, work that nourishes your mind and encourages you to think through things. Um, I'm lost in that sentence now, but if you're lucky to have these things, you do get a little clearer about who you are, about why you're here, about how you want to live, how you want to treat people, what actually provides you meaning and solace.
I love that. Would you tell me a little more about, you mentioned the idea of we begin with quiet observation and we begin by observing where we are before we create change. I think one of the things you do so very beautifully, and something that I found very much a balm as I moved away from Chicago and started living other places, is you're so aware of the influence that your surroundings have you. And in my mind, you're one of those authors who you cannot take out of the context of the environment in which they're from. The city of Chicago is so present in so much of the work that you do. Will you just talk a little bit for us about how that environment feeds you, informs you, shapes you? Because we are connected to the world around us. And for anyone who has never lived in Chicago, I think they'd be surprised at the passion that Chicagoans have for that city and what a truly romantic city it can be. And I mean romantic in the sense that
Right.
you can fall in love with it and it can change you. Would you just talk a little bit about your relationship with place and surroundings?
Well, I did not grow up in Chicago. So I grew up in Georgia, which is a very, very different place. I was born in Savannah, Georgia, when it was just a little moldering, very beautiful but remote town before it got trendy. Um, and then I lived a couple other places in Georgia, and then moved to Arizona for high school, which is radically different. I went to college in California, lived in California through my 20s, which had a huge effect on me, which is why I started doing yoga way before anybody I knew in Chicago was doing yoga. It was that 1970s California influence. And then I wound up in Florida, wound up in France. I lived many places before I got to Chicago. And at first, so I think the fact that I lived in many places has given me a real sensitivity to place and to the power of place and how different places alert different parts of your brain, different parts of your body. Chicago was so alien to me when I got here. And I just thought, I cannot live here. This big, concrete, noisy, crowded city. I mean, I'd hardly ever been in a big city before I lived here. I'd gone to New York once. San Francisco, not a big city by Chicago standards,
Pomona's not far from LA, though, where you went to college.
Yeah, right. So, and but still, Claremont, California is a small college
Yes.
town at the foothills of some mountains. And yeah, you could go into
Yeah, love it
LA,
there.
but it wasn't like living in Chicago. So, when I first got here, I just thought, I don't think I can do this. But it's when I started writing a column and I just resolved that through this work, I was going to get to know the city. I still have a yellow legal pad that I wrote down what I wanted to do with this column, which was help Chicagoans know each other. And that required for me knowing Chicago. So So I just started going out in every nook and cranny to all, the neighborhoods where people said don't go. Um, and I met people. And then I came to really appreciate the power of 4 seasons, of 4 radical seasons. It's like, oh, I hated winter. And then I came to understand how spring and summer mattered only if you'd had winter. That the perpetual spring of Palo Alto, California, where I had my first job, it's like, no, not for me. So anyway, I do think that Chicago has helped me really deeply understand the power of the seasons, the power of nature. Even though people don't think of this as a city with great nature, it actually is. I mean, if I flipped my computer around right now, you would see all the trees. I mean, I live in the heart of the city, and yet it's just, I'm surrounded by trees. And the quality of the light that changes, and the breeze that comes in off the prairie or off the lake. I mean, the lake. Um, it's taught me so much about nature and natural rhythms, and it's not just a big hard concrete and glass and brick place.
I don't think I've ever encountered another city in the world where they consciously chose to create a public space that runs the length of the city along the water to connect you with nature, because everywhere else it's just people would build right up and make those private homes.
Yeah, even I had never, as an adult, been to Milwaukee all the years I've lived here. So a few days ago, I just got in my car and I said, I'm going to Milwaukee. I drove to Milwaukee, and it's a cool town. I really like Milwaukee. And they have built some really cool stuff, like an art museum on their lakefront. But I just looked at that and I went, oh my God, I am so glad Chicago did not allow this kind of development on its lakefront, because you can still go out there and you can feel the magic of the ancient mariners on the Great Lakes.
I met my husband a week after he moved to Chicago from Los Angeles. He set up a dating profile on OkCupid, and I was the third person he saw, and we were immediately like, okay, we're getting married. So I had this wonderful opportunity to introduce him to the city. And, as we've moved around the country, one of the things we've come to appreciate is there's so few places where you have so much accessible, so cheaply and free, that you can just walk through the park and find all these amazing adventures, go to a wonderful cafe on the park or restaurant that's so much more affordable than in other cities, and have this really beautiful, beautiful grounded life because of the environment that it provides. Some of my favorite writings of yours have been these quiet observations of what life in Chicago is like. There's one article you wrote, I think it was actually fairly recent. I think it was called An Ode to a Lost Winter Glove, or a Single Winter Glove, uh, about what happens to these gloves that are left on the subway, that we always lose one. There's been several articles you've written about the transience and beauty of the Chicago summer. And, I don't remember which article it was, but I still have just this vivid memory of a description you had of, a rooftop in Wrigley and overlooking the city and the summer light. Um, for me, that is part of living a well-lived life, is can you actually just be present to these little moments? Can you be present to this? Our lives go by so fast. Can you see these little miracles that exist day in and day out that most people are taking for granted or don't notice because they're so absorbed in their thoughts or in their cell phones? But you notice them, and you encourage us to stop and pay attention to them as well.
Well, it is a practice. Sometimes we all do have to just remind ourselves, rather than, for me, for example, it's like rather than sitting inside and watching a show on Netflix, I could go up on my roof and look at the skyline. Oh, you have to overcome that little bit of inertia. It's like, pull yourself out of the chair. But the minute you do it, so much better out there. I mean, one of my philosophies is that everything's better outside.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe in the depth of winter where it's really good to come back inside. But, is something ailing you? Go outside. Go outside.
It's like Shakespeare, the power of nature to transform and change, and all the comedies and tragedies. Most of the transformation would happen by going back to the wilderness.
Yeah.
So, question for you. You are currently in what some studies have shown are the most productive decades of a person's life, but after, may I call it a dumpster fire of what happened to the Chicago Tribune and how they treated people, you've moved into another phase where you don't have the deadlines that you did. You don't have a certain number of articles you have to write every single week. And there is that old saying that necessity is the mother of invention. How are you connecting with your writing now, and what does the next few weeks, months, years hold for you as a storyteller, journalist, reporter, yogi, observer of the human condition? Without those deadlines, what is next for you? How do you continue to connect with your writing?
So you're asking the
I
small
know.
questions here. So I just want to clarify one thing. The Chicago Tribune, where I worked for many, many years, has, like almost every other newspaper in the country, gone through really radical struggles. But it's still hanging in. It's still doing good work. And I left. A lot of people don't understand this. A bunch of us left last summer voluntarily. No one made us leave. They offered us good buyouts. And I just, I thought about my life, how much time I have left on this planet, and just realized, I was 67 years old, and I was ready to have a different rhythm, to trade my stresses. Those stresses, I lived with those stresses for a long time. And it's not that ridding myself of those stresses was going to eliminate stress from my life. But I thought, just give me a new set of stresses. I need some novelty. It is way less stressful, I have to say, to not have these deadlines, to not live so much in public. Was it Serena Williams who recently announced she's quitting tennis? She's been resisting the word retirement and using the word evolving. And it's an evolution. And I think that's the perfect way to think of it, at whatever point in your life. We're all evolving all the time. And part of the trick is just listening to what, to what it is you need to do, assuming that you are lucky enough to be able to make these choices. There are a lot of people who don't really have choices. I've been, fortunate as someone who grew up in in an impoverished and very rocky, large family. I am extremely aware of the privilege that I have to be able to evolve in this way. So now, I'm involved in a project with someone that's keeping me quite entertained, if not financially remunerated.
Money's
I can never
overrated.
remember how to say that. But it's keeping me very engaged with reporting and writing and other people. And I'm playing a lot of piano. See my piano behind me. And seeing my people a lot, just hanging with my friends and family.
Would you ever consider doing a longer form piece? I mean, as most of your writing has been rather condensed. Would you ever write Life According to Mary, the book?
I don't know how interesting that book would be. I feel like, in a way, that, through 30 years of writing columns, I've had the opportunity to write that a little bit at a time in that very incremental way.
Absolutely.
I I don't know. I'm still evolving. I really do think, maybe not for everyone, but if you sit still for a little while, you can hear better what you ought to do next. And that's how I've felt about this past year. It's like I spent most of my adult life, well, my whole adult life after 16, working, striving, shaping life. And it's not that that's over, but I'm not striving in the same way that I felt I needed to for many years. It's nice to be a little quieter and just see what happens.
To truly live, to really be in the experience of life.
Which is not to say, the ordinary day doesn't present its challenges and anxieties and what? Life's still life, right?
Looking back on your career and what you've created, what are you most proud of? Is there an approach you took, a piece you've written, an event that happened? Like, what do you consider your legacy at this point? Still evolving.
I find that an awkward question, but I'll try to answer
I can move on to
it.
another one if you'd prefer.
It means a great deal to me that I've written some things that seem to have meant something to some people, that seem to have resonated with them and their lives. And it's often just the smallest columns, the ones that I often felt I had to apologize to my editors for. It's like, yeah, I'm writing another column about how people really should go out and seize the summer. But that's what, those small columns, the ones that didn't seem important, are so often the ones that people have responded to and said, because you said that, I went and I did these things this summer. And that means a lot to me, that people would care, that they would take those thoughts to heart and maybe be consoled by them, maybe act on them, maybe laugh.
For apparently that being an awkward question, that was a beautiful answer. And that's something I so resonate with as well. And, I think that was the first time I reached out to you a couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I sent you an email at the Chicago Tribune to say, what you've created has changed my life. What you have written has been one of the most meaningful relationships I've had, even though you don't know I exist. Or maybe you remember meeting me once or twice. And I think that's an interesting thing we have as creators. I'm just going to use the word creator, somebody who offers something to the world. Is we don't know the impact. We don't know what it does for someone else. I this past week on YouTube hit a landmark of achieving 10,000 subscribers, which is great. It's nice. It's been 2 years of hard work, but it doesn't really mean anything.
Congratulations.
The things that mean something to me are the stories I get when, about a year after my first book came out, someone sent me a very long email, which turned into a phone call, saying, my husband and I have been in couples therapy for a year, and it wasn't going well, and then we found your book, and I account the saving of our marriage to what you wrote and how you helped us. the story, the emails I get saying, I have been so afraid about embracing who I authentically am and living my life in a meaningful way, and the courage and the vulnerability and the transparency with which you live has given me hope to start living in a new and different way. Like, those are the things I am so proud of. It's not the numbers, it's not the sales, it's not the awards. It's, did I make a difference while I've been on this planet to help improve the human condition in some way, in some lives? And for me, I similarly feel those are the things I am most proud of.
Well, and I clearly remember the
Oh,
email
you
that you
do.
sent me, which was just,
Very
I
flattered.
did. Yeah, it was a lovely thing. And, interestingly, now that I'm not working, I find myself writing random thank you notes to people that I just didn't really do it before. I was just busy. Um, I wrote a thank you note to a book reviewer the other day, and I went to a program at the Chicago History Museum not long ago and ferreted out the person's email and just said thank you. And I think I feel like this is the point in my life where I just want to let people know what they've meant to me. So, saying thank you is a
It is.
nice thing.
People take the time to complain, but
And saying it without any expectation of getting anything
totally.
back from it, right? It's like sometimes people want some validation for saying thank you. And I get that. I
Yeah.
totally get that. But I try to do these things with the understanding of, I may not hear back from this person for whatever reason. The email didn't get there. They're swamped. Their mother's dying. Who knows what. But at least you said it. So thank you for
Of
saying it
course,
to
it's,
me.
people are so ready and apt to complain and write a note or a review when they have something unfavorable to say. But
Oh yeah.
I have found in my own life I would much rather do the opposite. The stuff that didn't make me happy, I try to let it go. Say it wasn't for me. I wasn't their audience. I don't understand their situation. Maybe they were having a bad day. But when somebody did something that felt meaningful, I want them to know. And whether or not they ever respond, it doesn't matter. But I'd rather send that vibe out into the universe. I'd rather send that energy out,
Right.
because it makes a
Right.
difference. And you don't know the impact that you have behind it. And those are the things that stick out in my memory when I look back in my life, the moments that I really love. Like, it's those people who, for me, took that time to come over and say thank you, that are just the little starbursts in my memory. Here's a difficult question. Have you ever asked or thought, gosh, I wish somebody would ask me about blank, or ask about my perspective on XYZ? Is there a question you always have been wanting to get to answer but have never been asked? And it's okay if no.
Yeah. You would have had to, ask me that question well in advance of this interview for me to know. Let me think for a minute.
Fair enough. That's why I said it's not an easy question.
I can't think of any questions that I could maybe think of a couple questions, but nothing that I would answer in this venue.
I'll have to take you out for a glass of wine to get those answers then, I suppose. Well, Mary, it is such a joy to get to connect with you. I am so honored and grateful to have this time to speak face to face. I have a saying I usually abide by in life, which is try not to meet your heroes because they will generally always disappoint you. But this has definitely been an exception to my rule, where to know you more is to love you more and to think you're even more wonderful than I already knew you and assumed you and imagined you to be. So thank you so much for taking this time with me, and all my wishes and blessings for a very, very happy summer, year, and decades ahead.
Same to you. It was an honor to be here. Thank you.